It is day 2 of combing through the White House budget proposal where there's no money left for Yucca Mountain. On the other hand, there is more money for satellites to study climate change. We'll break down what NOAA would get from this budget proposal. And the Interior Secretary heads north to the site of the controversial Cape Wind project.
From the Energy News Center in Washington, D.C., this is the Energy Report with Susan McGinnis.
And good Tuesday morning. I'm Tyler Suiters in for Susan McGinnis. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Energy Report on the second day of February 2010. The Obama administration has been pushing for a year, and now DOE has officially asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to drop its license application to use Yucca Mountain. This move comes as the new White House budget proposal zeroes out funding for the Nevada Nuclear Waste Repository at both of these agencies. Now, DOE asked NRC to suspend the licensing process that has been underway since June of 2008, and it said it will ask to withdraw the license within 30 days. NRC's administrative law judges have the final say on granting withdrawal here. The move reverses Energy Secretary Stephen Ju's position last year. That's when he said Yucca would not be used, but the license would be pursued so licensing standards for any future repository could be established. Chu has just named a long-promised blue ribbon panel to explore alternatives to geologic disposal for spent fuel and high-level waste from commercial power plants. What is still uncertain, however, the fate of several decades worth of Cold War military waste that was to be placed at the Yucca Mountain facility. Another key environmental element now included in the White House budget proposal: more satellites to study climate change and also better resources to address the impacts. President Obama is asking for $5.6 billion for NOAA. That total is a 17% increase over the current year's administration budget. The breakdown here: $2.2 billion to satellite services, with half of that for the new Joint Polar Satellite System, and $730 million for next-generation geostationary satellites. Also, $9.5 million for the Deep Space Climate Observatory. And the White House also wants almost $465 million for NOAA's Climate Research Office, including almost $21 million to the Carbon Tracker Observing and Analysis System and $10 million for regional and national climate assessments. While NOAA and DOE would both get budget increases under the White House plan, EPA would take a hit to its annual budget. The FY 2011 proposal would cut the agency's funding by 3.2% overall, but EPA would receive $56 million for the agency, quoting here from the budget proposal, and states to address climate change effectively through regulatory initiatives to control greenhouse gas emissions. That total includes $43 million in new funding, more than triple last year's program funding. And EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson sees that as a major positive for her agency.
To take action on climate change and promote clean energy, the budget includes an increase of more than $43 million. This will support implementation of the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Rule and facilitate permitting and enforcement under the Clean Air Act. That funding will continue work on the Clean Cars program and help us develop common-sense solutions for cutting emissions from major stationary and mobile sources. And it will promote work on current and future carbon capture and sequestration projects.
Also among the proposed changes for EPA, a new standard for ozone smog, which would overturn a standard personally set by former President Bush. And today the agency will hold a public hearing in Arlington, Virginia, just across the river from us here in Washington, on the plan to set a primary standard for ground-level ozone. That standard would be between 0.06 and 0.07 parts per million, then would be phased in over the next 20 years. A panel of EPA experts recommended the same standard 2 years ago when the agency was considering lowering a standard set back in 1997 during the Clinton administration. But President George W. Bush set that standard at 0.075 parts per million. Many local governments are fighting the move. They say almost half the counties in the nation that monitor ozone already can't comply with the existing standard, and the change would cost them millions of dollars to meet. The American Lung Association, the Sierra Club, and other clean air advocates are pushing hard for the new standard. They say this will make a dramatic improvement in our air quality. A federal judge is now granting Massey Energy its way, banning protesters from the southern West Virginia properties where that company does surface mining. The measure is temporary for now, but Massey says it wants this ban to be permanent. The judge granted the request in conjunction with a lawsuit filed by Massey targeting protesters who have spent the past year invading the company's mine sites. The protesters say they hope to persuade the Obama administration to ban mountaintop removal altogether in that region. And another coal controversy is now taking a new turn. Late last night, a Virginia town gave the go-ahead for zoning changes to allow what would be the state's largest coal-fired power plant. Old Dominion Electric Cooperative wants to build a 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plant at an estimated cost of up to $6 billion. And the location, a tiny town in Virginia called Dendron, population 297. Well, the utility is promising 225 jobs for that rural area west of Newport News, Virginia. Now it is up to the Surry County Board of Supervisors to follow suit. Or that board could stop the plant since part of the proposed site is outside of town boundaries. Numerous environmental groups, including the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, are now trying to stop that plant from going forward. This morning there is up and down news from BP. The British energy giant reports a net profit in the fourth quarter, spurred by increased oil and gas production and also higher average oil prices. But BP's shares fell more than 4% as the company's performance in refining was weaker than expected. Analysts say results demonstrate how big integrated oil companies are now struggling to capitalize on higher oil prices because of a dire commercial environment in their refining business. BP Chief Executive Tony Hayward says he expects the economic recovery this year to be, in his words, slow and gradual. So because of that, BP will continue to focus on improving upstream operational performance and reducing downstream costs. BP trimmed its costs by $4 billion in 2009. Overall, BP says it expects its oil and gas output to be lower this year than last year, but it should resume growth in 2011 in line with the company's target. That target is a 1% to 2% annual increase. We'll take a look at the numbers from the commodities markets right now. Oil is up 56 cents on the NYMEX so far, selling at $74.99 a barrel. Natural gas up just 1 cent, now at $5.45 per 1,000 cubic feet on the Henry Hub. A congressional aide who was key in steering the Waxman-Markey House climate bill earlier last year is now leaving Capitol Hill. Jerry Waldron was the staff director and chief counsel for the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. Chairman Ed Markey's office says Waldron is now returning to private law practice in a Washington, D.C. firm. He will in turn be replaced by Michael Gu, who became counsel to the committee back in February of last year. Markey credits Gu's, quote, encyclopedic knowledge of climate and energy policy as well as politics for the success of the climate bill last summer, and Markey predicts it would be crucial in helping the measure become law. This morning, Wyoming Governor Dave Friedenthal is pushing several bills to regulate the wind industry in his state. Among them, a $3 per megawatt hour excise tax and also a temporary suspension of eminent domain powers to merchant energy companies that want to connect wind turbines to the electric grid. The governor also wants to retool the Wyoming Industrial Information and Siting Act to include wind farms of 30 turbines or more. Developers of those projects would be required to provide bonding or other financial assurances to ensure decommissioning and reclamation. Another bill establishing minimum state standards, things like buffer zones between wind turbines and other existing facilities. Wyoming has experienced a boon in wind energy development with more than 450 new turbines over the last year and a half. Today, Ken Salazar makes what may be the highest profile site visit of his tenure at the Department of Interior. The Secretary is visiting the site of the proposed Cape Cod project on Nantucket Sound. Salazar oversees both federal agencies with the most jurisdiction over this project, that is the Minerals Management Service and the National Park Service. In today's visit to Martha's Vineyard, Salazar will tour the site where developer Jim Gordon wants to build 130 wind turbines. The Secretary will also meet with leaders of local Native American tribes who say the 400-foot-tall structures would ruin the view of the sound and the sunrise and interfere with their religious rituals. Secretary Salazar says if these sides can't come together on their own agreement by March 1st, he will then step in and make a final decision on the Cape Wind project sometime in April. Well, as this Tuesday gets underway, we're taking a look at some of the events scheduled around the Washington, D.C. area today. Already underway, beginning at 8:45 Eastern this morning, the American Lung Association and the Sierra Club began a conference on smog and the new EPA ozone limits we discussed earlier. This takes place at the Hyatt Regency Crystal City in Arlington. And that immediately precedes the EPA public hearing on that proposal, which gets underway at 9:30 Eastern. Also, we're following a very busy day for White House Budget Director Peter Orszag. He is testifying before the Senate Budget Committee today, beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern on the new FY 2011 budget proposal. And then Orszag is appearing before the House Budget Committee as well at 2 o'clock Eastern this afternoon. And at noon today, the Center for National Policy is holding a discussion on climate change as the new security imperative in the melting Arctic. Again, that gets underway at noon Eastern. And that is this Tuesday morning edition of the Energy Report. Thanks for joining us here in the Energy News Center. If you have any suggestions or comments, questions about our programming here on Clean Skies News, you can reach us anytime here in Washington. Our address is at the bottom of your screen. It's contact@cleanskies.com. And you can follow us as well throughout your day on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tyler Souters. We're glad you're with us. You're watching Clean Skies News.